It's the Digital Babble with your host, Flipper. Colorful commentary on your photography. Seen on fingerlakes1.com.
Hey everybody, it's the Digital Babble here with me, Flipper. It's a show about photography and about Photoshop. And I basically go over different things, different aspects of photography, different techniques, different things. Just have some fun. Just babble on about whatever the topic is of this week, which this week, it's all about the AV setting on your camera. So what AV is aperture priority. And what that gives you is total control over your aperture. And what that'll give you is it'll change how big or small the opening of the lens is in the middle. So the bigger the number, the smaller the opening. The lower the number, the wider the opening. Because this is all demonstrated in f-stops, it's a mathematical formula. So it's f stands for the focal length of the lens, and it's divided by whatever that opening is. So if the ratio is, say you got a 50 millimeter lens and you've got a 45 millimeter opening, that would be like a f1.2. And then as far down closed as you can get that opening is the other end of the spectrum. So say you have a 50 millimeter lens and you can get it stopped down to mathematically 5. So 5 millimeter. That would then be a f10 maximum aperture. So describing that, I know it sounds backwards, and it's definitely something that you want to keep in mind is that it is backwards. So the smaller the number, the wider the opening, the larger the number, the smaller the opening. Now what this does for you is it controls the depth of field. So from front to back, in your picture, it will give you a bigger or smaller depth of field. And what this means is that from this point to this point is in sharp focus. Now, the smaller the opening, the more depth of field you get. So now, whoops, wrong hand, sorry. So from here to here now is in clear focus. Now, the smaller the number, the wider the opening, it changes, and now only from here to here is in sharp focus. What that does is the aperture is the opening to the lens. It's like the valve on a faucet. It opens up, allowing more light to either enter, or closes up and allows less light to enter the lens opening and hit the film plane, thus controlling such things as intensity of light, how much light's getting through at any one given time. So this can also play a role in your ISO and your shutter and all that good stuff. So like low light photography, typically you hear people talk about f-stops that are 2.8, 3.5, 4, somewhere in that range, where you might have bright sunlight f-stops in the range of like f11, f16, f22. Now there is some problems if you stop the lens down too far. So like saying if you go to an f22 stop, you might actually find aberrations or different problems with the image itself. Like your color might shift, your sharpness might shift. There might be a little bit of a difference in the total focusing range that you can get. Those things are typically outside of the sweet spot of your f-stop range. So now I just said it, sweet spot. What is the sweet spot for most lenses? Usually 2 stops up from the maximum opening. So saying if your lens is 2.8, 2 full stops up from that is like f5.6. That's going to give you the most sharp, clear image that you can get with the most depth of field at whatever focus range you're working with. Same concept on the back side. You're going for maximum depth of field. You don't want to be at, say, f22 is your maximum depth or maximum aperture. You don't want to be at f22 taking a picture expecting that the whole picture is going to be in sharp focus. What you're going to do is you're going to back that off 2 full stops to f16, and then you're going to focus about a third of the way into the photo or 2/3 of the way in the photo, depending on which side of the fence you are on that. Third of the way in the photo would be for the smaller f-stops. 2/3 of the way in the photo would be for the larger f-stops. And what this does is it gives you the most depth of field from front to back. Now, the camera also has another setting that's right next to the aperture priority setting, which is called A-Dep. Okay, and I might as well talk about it here. We've already talked about depth of field. Depth of field is your acceptable focus from front to back of the film plane. Okay, A-Dep as a setting looks at the scene, kind of measures it up and says, okay, the best depth of field for this photo to get the maximum depth of field, but yet the smallest aperture is X. And it'll try to set your camera all the way around from aperture to shutter to ISO to basically give you the maximum depth of field. And that's what A-Dep does. Basically, it does the same thing as AV or aperture priority, but takes into account that we're trying to get the most depth of field, where AV mode is allowing you to set the aperture to control your depth of field. So, that being said, let's pop over to the learning board. Here we have a basic point and shoot Nikon camera. This has been my friend for the last 12 shows. It's really great to just kind of see the mode dial where the shutter is. As you can see, the mode dial's right up there, and that's where you're going to find your AV mode. You're going to find your A-Dep mode. And if we pop over here to the next, there we go. And this is the actual mode dial looking down on it. And you notice we're going to set it to AV mode, and right next to it is the A-Dep mode. And what this is going to do and what this gives us is that extra control. And the aperture priority mode lets us do two things. One, it lets us set our aperture, and then the camera figures out the shutter. Two, on aperture priority mode versus, say, portrait mode, which is the little person mode that we covered in show 3, I think, 4. Basically, the major difference is that in portrait mode, you don't set anything other than point and shoot. In aperture priority mode, you can set your aperture to define your depth of field. The camera does the rest of the work, but you can also set your ISO, and you can also set your exposure compensation, which gives you more workflow, more options, more ability to get creative and artistic with your camera. Okay, so aperture priority mode works very similar to the portrait mode. It also adds the additional functions, like I just said, of the exposure compensation and the ISO. You're allowed to change that in this mode, most likely on your camera. Read your instructions. Of course, I always preach that every show. Read your instructions, learn your camera and how it works and how it's set up. You can also, a lot of times, I think iPhones and Android devices, they have the little webcams and the little cameras on the back of them, or so you can take pictures. Sometimes those have an aperture setting, not too much, but sometimes I've seen them where they do have an aperture setting, and they definitely offer some control, but nothing like a real camera. And I know somebody's bound to get mad at me, a real camera versus the iOS, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, whatever. Really, there is a major difference between a camera and an iPod, or an iPad, sorry, or an iPhone. And I think the major difference is control, artistic control, where you can actually think about what you're shooting and get it out of the camera. So, aperture priority. Here's some examples of aperture priority. What we can do, we can set the aperture to a wider opening, such as here in this example, it's f3.5. You can see that the Nash in Nashville and that shot glass behind there is a little bit blurry. That's the bokeh. As we go out of that acceptable depth of field, the background starts getting blurry, or the foreground. If you're in the foreground, it might get a little blurry. When we stop it down to f8, you'll notice the Nashville now is just as sharp as the Dominican Republic shot glass up front here. The reason why I was shooting a macro type shot like this is usually macro shots, makes it very obvious the depth of field and the differences between apertures. So here you see, like I said, the Nashville is a little blurry. And the left side of the photo and the right side of the photo is nice, crisp, and clear. So this is where we can get creative. So let's say that we're going to shoot a portrait, and maybe there's something distracting in the background that we're just not able to get rid of. Maybe a color or a tone or something. We could set the aperture up and move the subject as far away from that something as we possibly can. Focus just on the subject, and then everything behind the subject just blurs right out. So it's just nothing but a sea of color behind there. This is where we get the creativeness, and we start looking at the creative eye and start looking at what we want to get out of the camera when we go shooting. So keeping this in mind, okay, we got something in the background that we don't want to see so much of. We can take and set the aperture to a nice wide open aperture like an f2.8, an f1.8 if you're working with prime lenses. If you're working with point and shoot, whatever you can get out of it. Focus directly on that person's nose. From the nose to the back of the head is probably going to be nice and sharp. Whatever is further out in the background just blurs right out nicely. Now, there's another way to get this effect and make it more pronounced. And that's by zooming in all the way. So now you as a photographer would have to get back away from the subject a bit to get the same composition, but then use a wide open aperture like f3.5, f2.8, f1.8. And then when you shoot, you're zoomed all the way in. Now what this is going to do is it's going to take in less field of view. So, you know, your field of view might only be like two degrees, okay, coming out of the camera if you're zoomed all the way in. If you're on wide angle, that's where you get the idea of wide angle. Now it's maybe be 100 degrees or a little over 90 or whatever. And that's where you can kind of compress a photo and make portraits very, very lovely without really trying too hard. You can just set the camera to aperture priority, set it to the lowest possible setting. You can set it so f2.8, which means the lens is open as far as it's going to go. Zoom all the way out. If you can get out there around 100 millimeter, 200 millimeter, whatever, maybe you got a 300 millimeter. I've even seen portrait photographers purposely shoot a 400 millimeter lens just to blur out the distracting items that might be behind the subject or around the subject. Very interesting technique. The further out you go, the shorter the depth of field it is. But usually if you're focused right on that person or that subject, that's nice and tack sharp, and everything else just kind of fades out into this really nice, soft, kind of enchanting blur. And you really don't have to think too hard. Just set the aperture, pull up, pull halfway to get your autofocus and your exposure, and then fire away. A lot of times you don't even have to do exposure compensation because you're working in such a compressed mode, you're in such a small field of view where the camera can't really goof up the exposure. So A-Dep kind of works the same way. Again, I'll explain that again. A-Dep will look for the maximum depth of field with what it sees in front of the camera. So if you're looking to maximize that depth of field, you could always just switch it over to A-Dep real quick and just let it go, and you might get a very surprisingly clear shot with whatever you're working with. So there's a couple different techniques for taking a portrait, making it nice and soft, really letting the camera do the work for the most part, but you got a lot of creative control. Maybe you think the portrait's just a little too dark. You just lighten it up a little bit with your exposure compensation dial. Let me bring the camera back here. And if you look where the shutter is, right underneath the shutter word, there's an exposure compensation dial. This is where you get your plus and minus 1, 2, and it's all in thirds. And you can make the picture a little lighter, a little darker. So this way, if you're looking at the picture and going, geez, that's really way too dark, you could lighten it up a little bit by going the plus side a little bit. Maybe you're looking at a dark subject and you're like, geez, that's way too light, they're washed out. Then you can darken it up a little bit. And that's what the other side of the dial gives you is a lot more creative control over your camera and giving you those extra controls like exposure compensation, ISO, and working in that sense. Why do I think that aperture priority is a great tool? Is really the fact that you control the aperture, let the camera do the rest, okay? Now, you're going to want to watch what your shutter comes out to be because, I mean, if you're zoomed way out to 200 millimeter and you're trying to shoot without a tripod at 200 millimeter and your shutter speed's only 1/60th of a second, you are not going to be able to handhold that and get a clear picture of the subject. And you're going to ask yourself, why did that come out blurry? Oh, I can't. So the idea of the rule of however far out you're zoomed out should be the shutter speed still applies. It's just a matter of, you're going to have to look for it instead of the camera. So that's one of the good things that I really like about the cameras that have aperture priority is that you can zoom out, figure out what your aperture is. 9 times out of 10, if the subject is well lit, you can usually get a shutter speed that's comparable and will capture the subject without getting motion blur. And if you are getting motion blur, stick it on a tripod. I just bought a GorillaPod this last week, and it's kind of a neat tripod. And what it is it's just 3 tentacles that are posable, like Woody the doll and a couple other things. So you can actually pose this tripod around a railing, get it stable, put your camera on it if you got a point and shoot like this little Nikon guy, and then use that as your stability. So you can take long zoomed in photos without having to worry about the shutter speed. Still, again, the one thing that I don't like about any type of AV mode or any type of mode where something gets set automatically is it still does not give you the absolute full control over your picture. You'll find when I get to manual, I'll be like, oh, manual is the ultimate setting. Well, it is the ultimate setting for getting a lot of artistic shots. It is not the ultimate setting for speed. So if we're shooting a wedding or if we're shooting sports or something, manual mode is not where it's at. So each mode has a particular strong point. Like we said last week about shutter priority, usually sports, usually moving objects, things that are just going way too fast, or whatever. Aperture priority, more of the depth of field, getting that nice soft portrait, making the portrait feel nice to the viewer. So let's get back to a couple examples here. Let's see. Whoops, that's that one. There we go. So here we have another example of some batteries that I had put on the countertop just to show the difference in depth of field. You can see in the f3.5, the battery in the background is really blurred out. You can barely read the lettering. Now, if we put more distance between these two things and we focus on the front object, the back object will get even more blurry to the point where it could just be a blotch of color. So that's always something to keep in mind when we're trying to get a little creative and we're trying to get a portrait, maybe the way we want it or how we want it. Maybe we got this envisionment of a nice, really soft portrait. The face is nice and clear, but everything around him is nice and blurred. To take out some of those distracting elements, like I don't know if you've ever seen some pictures where you take a picture of your friend and they're like, "Hey, how you doing?" And then they got something driven right through the back of their head, like a railing or something. You can take, if that railing's far enough back, you could take and change your aperture a little bit, and that railing will blur out into a soft color or a soft, if it's black railing, and just be nice, soft, grayish, kind of looks like just kind of like a mist behind him almost, or her. So, again, I think one of the other thing that is not so hot about aperture priority, in some scenes it could inadvertently blur out something that you thought would be in focus. I've seen that happen where people will take their cameras, pull up, and go, okay, I really want a soft picture, so I'm going to go to the lowest aperture I could possibly go. And then the camera sets it, and it's not quite right where it focused, and the nose was nice and sharp, but the eyes and everything else was kind of like blurry. So all you saw was these blurred out eyes. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. And again, it's all about getting creative, about thinking through your shot, getting a mental picture of what you want to see out of a photo. If you're just pulling up and shooting, that's what you're going to get. Is you're going to pull up and shoot. You put a little bit of thought. It doesn't have to be a lot of thought. A little bit of thought into what you want to see. A lot of times you can get some amazing pictures without trying too hard. I think one of the things I'm going to do tonight, since I have the evening to myself, I'm probably going to go out downtown Seneca Falls. I've always wanted to capture a sunset over the canal. Tonight looks like it's going to be a perfect night, so if I get done with the show in time and I can pack my stuff up and get out of here, I'll probably be downtown Seneca Falls right on the bridge trying to take a shot with my point and shoot. I'm not going to get my big camera out yet, just because I'm really having fun with this point and shoot camera. Just got some new toys for it. So it's going to be a nice relaxing evening just to kind of go, let's just have some fun. And there I'm going to experiment with depth of field. I'm probably going to set it on aperture priority. I'm probably going to be about F11, F16 if I can get there. If not, I'll probably be about F8. And then just take a few shots until I get what I'm looking for, and then kind of make some modifications and tweaks. And then I'll probably shoot 10 shots, and probably 1 out of those 10 shots is going to be exactly what I was looking for. And it's just a little bit of thought, a little bit of planning. Go do it. Work the picture. So there you have it. That's kind of aperture priority. I'm also touching on the automatic depth of field, the A-Dep setting. Both settings are pretty straightforward. They both work the same way, or they function off of each other, I should say. So I really think that you should get out there and shoot with that, because aperture priority can be amazing, especially when you start zooming out your wildlife. If you can get a nice 200 millimeter lens that's f3.5 or even f4, you can get out there fully at 200 millimeter and you shoot a deer and you fill the frame with a deer. The rest of the background is just going to blur out into a nice hazy green if you're shooting it against a forest, or greens and browns, and it just really has a lot of substance to it. So let's see. I forgot where I was going with this. Oh, we're going to go into Photoshop. That's our next segment of the show, is working in Photoshop. So what I decided to do this week was one of the questions that I got on the website. Oh, by the way, if you want to go check out our website, or email me questions, or email me photos to work on, or you like the show or whatever, please email me at thedigitalbabble@gmail.com, or you can go check out our website at tdbny.com, and you can go check out previous shows. We're also on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter. Like us, share us. You know, if you like the show, I'd really like to get more shares and more people liking it, more people watching. But this week, one of the questions was Flipper, I wanted to cut this person out of the photo and put them in something else. And that's kind of a tough situation with a person, but you can get some practice with some basic items. So what I did was I came up with 2 images that could be pretty fun here to play with. As you notice here, this is our shot glasses from the example before. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this shot glass out here, the green one, and we're going to cut him out, and we're going to get rid of the reflection and cut that guy out. And then we're going to put it into a different background, and maybe make a I don't know, poster for the Dominican Republic or something. We'll do something with it. We'll see what we got. But that's the whole objective, is to cut this out. Now, there's many techniques that we can do that will cut this out of the photo and allow you to put it into another photo. So what we'll do is we'll start with some basic techniques and work our way up. So the first technique is to really, let me get rid of the drawing here. The first technique, which is really neat, is we'll just outline the shot glass with a mask or a selection, and then turn that selection into a mask. Whoops. So we're going to get it as close as we can, like I have the red line here. We're going to get it as close as we can, probably right on the edge, and then maybe do a little feathering with the selection, just to make it so it pops off the page, and then we can put it into any other photo that we want to. So how about we get started with that technique first? And this is using the pen tool in Photoshop. So here we are in Photoshop, and the pen tool is right here. And when we click on the pen tool, you'll see up here at the top is all the settings for the pen tool. You can set the pen tool to make a new shape. You can set the pen tool to make a new path. You can also just do fill pixels, which is basically it just makes a shape and then fill it in with a color or some other item. So first thing what I want to do is, since we're going to be drawing on a shape, or we're going to make a shape, I'm going to select the paths tool, and then I'm going to find a place to start. Now you can start on a flat surface, which is usually the best way. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to get right in here, and I'm going to see it should be right at the tip. And I'm going to kind of come up to where it moves up here, like there. And we're going to get up in the corner there. Now, we got to remember when we're doing this is that if we drag the mouse a little bit, we can get actually curvy so that it will outline that shape perfectly, nice and smooth, and you won't see any jagged edges. And like here, I probably shouldn't have curved it, but we'll do it anyway. So we get right up to here, and then we're going to curve it just ever so slightly, and a little more here, and just a touch on the curve here, and then we're going to kind of hit there, and we're going to curve it up in there so that we can get the lip, and we're going to come down through here like so, down here, most of it straight. And we're going to come down through here, and I'm working as fast as I can so nobody gets bored too bad. Let's see, we're down here like this. Whoops, there's a spot I should have curved it, but we can leave it for right now. So, and we're going to curve it and curve it a little more, because now down here at the base it's all curve. So this is something to keep in mind when you're working on this. Is what curves are we doing? And what I'm doing is I'm clicking and dragging the point out to make a curve or a radius. In computer terms, it's a 3-point radius, and that's pretty much how computers draw curves anyhow, mathematically. So as you can see here, I got my outline, but I've kind of goofed it up a little bit, but that's okay. I'm not going to worry about it too much right this second. If you're really doing this because you want to cut this out and put it someplace else, I would say take your time and do it better. I'm always short on time on here, so I'm going to try to get this technique out and a couple other techniques, so bear with me. And paths, if we go over and click on the paths tab over here, we can see that we have a working path. What we want to do is take that working path and save it as something else. So we're going to double click on the working path and then name it something like shot glass, or whatever we can identify it clearly when we're ready to use it. So here's our shot glass paths layer. Now down at the bottom you have a couple different items. You can fill it, you can outline it, or you can load the path as a selection. You can make working path from the selection if you had a selection. You can make a new path to work with, or you can delete the path. So I'm going to make the little dotted circle guy over here, which is load the path as a selection. You'll notice we'll get our ants going here. We got our little marching ants going around our little shot glass. Okay. For illustration purposes, I'm going to go back to the layers, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go edit copy, and I'm going to make a new layer, and I'm going to go edit paste, and I'm going to get rid of the background. There's my shot glass cut out. Now I can take the shot glass, move it anywhere I want in the picture, or I can take and move it to another image, or I can take another image and bring it in here. I could make a illustration. So let's make a quick illustration. So I'm going to take and we're going to make a new layer that's going to be the illustration. I'm going to move it underneath my shot glass because I want the background to be the background. So let's do a selection here. 2/3, maybe not that much. Let's back it up here. Let's see, probably not even 2/3. No, maybe that's a third up from the bottom. I'm going to fill it with a gradient, black to white, going to be linear. So I'm going to do the gradient. So I hit gradient, it's black to white. I did this item right here, which is the linear gradient, and I'm going to drag it straight up and down. If you're having a problem getting it straight, maybe you're a little cockeyed like this, what you can do is hit the shift key and it'll do every 45 degrees. So it makes it very perfectly straight. So I'm going to do it from top to bottom of this selection here. And you'll notice that we got it a little dark on the bottom, and it's really the wrong direction. Well, maybe not. We could actually work with this. So we'll go that route. And let's see, we're going to do another selection. And we're going to overlap this just ever so slightly in that crease so we know that we got color everywhere. All right, now I'm going to do that gradient again, and we're going to go top to bottom. I'm going to hold shift to make sure that it's straight. And notice it's the wrong direction this time. So I'm going to edit undo. I'm going to undo the reverse and do the same drawing here. Or you could just reverse the way that you're drawing it. So now we have this. Now, the reason why I did this way, I'll explain it since I'm doing it. Select, deselect, so we got no ants. what I did was I was trying to figure out where does the table end and the background start and what kind of color or what kind of light is back there. We know the base is fairly well lit because, the shot glass is reflecting a lot of white light there. And what that's doing is it's giving us a sense that there's light in the background. And this illustration, I'm kind of like, okay, well, if we fade it out to the top and fade it out to the front, you notice that if we do it at the third up from the bottom, that's where our crease is, per se. You're kind of giving that three-dimensional sense of where the table actually is, stops, and moves on to a background. So we go back onto our shot glass layer. We can actually move this and put this wherever it feels comfortable, which I'm thinking right about here. Now, what we could do now is make that fake reflection. And because we cut this out, now we can work with just this object and start playing with like reflections and shadows and all sorts of things. So I'm going to make a copy of it, put it underneath our main shot glass. I'm going to go up and go edit, transform, and we're going to flip it vertically. So now we have an upside down shot glass, right? I'm going to put it and line it right up, just about right up, with our other shot glass. But here's the difference. We're going to lower the opacity to about 25%, probably would look good. I'm also going to blur this layer before I do anything else. So I'm going to blur it. I'm going to go Gaussian blur. And I'm going to probably go about 8 to 10, maybe 15, depending on where I want it. I artistically, it could be wherever you're comfortable with it. You could do it a little less and just give it a little blur just so it kind of looks like it's a reflection, okay? Now, the other thing we're going to do, I'm going to do more because I kind of like more in this example because really it's probably dirty plexiglass. So I'm going to hit OK. And then what I'm going to do now is I'm going to mask this because the reflection doesn't go from all the way from the back of the photo to the front of the photo. I want to mask out the bottom part of that reflection so it doesn't give me the sense that the reflection goes on forever. So we're going to make a mask, click on our mask. We're going to do that gradient tool again, black to white, because that's what masks do, black and white. And I'm going to just do a small section here to take it in and out from here. And that was just probably a little too much, I think. Oh, I didn't get exactly what I wanted. Okay, so edit, undo. Let's get our what I didn't do black to white. Now I got black to white again. Let's try this again. So I probably want it to start fading out right here, and I want it to fade completely out once it gets there. Now notice it's the wrong direction. I did it again. I needed to reverse it. So edit, undo. And that's the beauty of the undo key, is that you can undo your very last step. So if something really doesn't look right, just undo it and start over. So we now fade that reflection out somewhere probably in there. I'm going to probably redo this one more time. Right there. So, you know what? It kind of got a little too light. I think I'm going to darken it up a little bit by increasing the opacity just a little bit. Not too much. Now, another thing that we can do is we know that reflections sometimes are duller in color. So on this particular layer, I'm actually going to take the image adjustment. Once I click on the right layer here. Image adjustment, and I'm going to take and desaturate this just a touch. So hue and saturation. Now if we pump up the colors, you'll notice the reflection gets brighter, brighter, brighter. If we bring it down, it gets a little darker, darker, darker. Now it kind of looks like it belongs in that plexiglass, and it's not actually attached to the other shot glass. Now at any time you can move, click on that layer and click on the move key up here, or the move tool. You can move that reflection to wherever it feels good to you. You can even use the arrow keys with the move command to move it up and down. So I'm looking probably right about there. Okay, so now maybe we're going to build in some text and put some text up in here and whatever else. So maybe we could do... holy cow, that's some big text. Let's try dropping that down to 100. And I don't know if I got... There we go. So come to the islands. Whoops, to the islands. Islands. All right. And then maybe we're going to do another. So we click on another tool, go back to the text tool. We can make another layer. And we're going to make another text layer. Maybe Jimmy Buffett Buffet. So now maybe that's going to belong here, or maybe down in this way. Probably right here. That's probably pretty good. Now what we can do is do effects to this, to the text layers. You know, we can add a stroke so it's completely outlined, make it bolder, darker, less bolder, darker. I'm just going to do that, and then I'm going to put the same stroke on the other one. You know, you can start getting really interesting with some of these effects. You can do drop shadow, you can do color overlay, you can do pattern overlays. If you got a pattern that you want to work with, maybe bubbles like that, or maybe this, or maybe you find some other patterns. I think we got, let's see, oh, patterns too. Okay. You know, you could do different textures just to give it a different feel. Instead of pattern overlay, you can do color overlays. You know, just whatever the pixels are, overlay a color. You can also do a really neat effect, which I like to do with text a lot of times, is you get rid of the fill, but the you'll notice that the stroke stays there. So now what you do is you have a transparent stroke. So you notice when we go over the white area, it's white, but when we get in the gray area, it's gray. Same concept with the come to the islands bond. So it's kind of a neat thing. So there we go. So we got a nice little image going here. Let's save it back to the new JPEG, and we'll take a look at it, see what it looks like. Boop. Yes, I want to replace it. Okay. And let's go back to the original. So we started with this, and we ended up with this. We cut the shot glass out. We made its own reflection. We made this really kind of interesting little gradient to make it kind of three-dimensional, give it some place to sit. And then we added some clear text or outline text to the whole thing to convey our message. So that's what we've done with this cutout technique. Let's do another cutout technique, which is pretty interesting, pretty fun. What we could do in Photoshop is we can try a couple of different ways, and this is all the same type of technique. What we're going to do is we're going to grab the quick selection tool. If there's and then increase the size a touch so that we can get what we want. If there is not a lot of difference between the object you're trying to select and the pixels around it, it might not select it properly. So what you do is with the quick select is you draw or paint over it and tell Photoshop, this is what I want to select. And it'll try to figure out what you're trying to select. Now, sometimes it gets it right, sometimes it don't. If it gets it right, you leave it. If not, you press the Alt key, and you'll notice here the plus sign turns to a minus sign, and you can reshape this up any way you want. You know, so if you hold the Alt, it's minus, it takes away. If you press, if you let go of the Alt, it's to add to it. So like here, I took too much out. I'm going to let go of the Alt key, and I'm going to do it again. And those are key modifiers in Photoshop. It's an amazing little tool just to flip back and forth and, you know, quickly adjust, keep going, quickly adjust some more. Okay, I need a little more here, a little more there. Click a few times, see what I get. So that's pretty close to what I wanted for my batteries. And it's always good to zoom in and work on photos this way when you're working on selections and stuff, because it does give you a sense of where the actual selection is going to happen. Sometimes it works great, sometimes it don't. So there we go, we got a selection. Now we can do the same thing we did in the last picture where we go edit copy and make a new layer and go edit paste. And then you'll notice we have a cutout battery now on another layer. So that's one way of cutting it out. Now, again, you can go and put this in an advertisement. You can build your own thing. I know a lot of people like to sit on Facebook and they love those some e cards. You can build some of these some e cards with actual photos that you take, and like maybe this battery thing. You might be like, my battery might be drained, but coffee fills me back up. Or whatever you want to say. It can be whatever, and you could build your own canvases and figure out what you want. So this is a great technique to cut those things out and make them objects that you can now put in other images. So like saying if we want to bring a background layer in, like this wonderful background here from Florida, a nice sunrise, we'll pull this off the thing here, and we'll take the move command and bring it over into this photo, and we'll close it and back this up and then put it where we want it. So that fills the whole photo there. All right, that's kind of pretty. Maybe we don't want it to fill the whole photo. Maybe we want to give it a sense of it's just all nothing but sky. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a Control T to do a transform, and we're going to stretch this baby right out. And then move it south until we stretch it, and move it south and get what we want out of this whole photo. And you'll notice I'm going to keep playing with this because I'm going to keep getting the lampposts in here, because the lampposts are really part of that whole area. Pretty close, pretty close. Let's see here. One more stretch. So now we got nothing but cloud, right? So let's bring our battery back on top. And now you notice we can now put our battery someplace. Now you don't have to leave the battery that size. You can make it bigger by going Control T and making it bigger and be like skyscrapers here. So what we can do is we can do one there, make a copy of the layer, and move it where we want it, and maybe have one here, and make another copy of the layer, and then move it where we want it, and be like, okay, this one's got to be bigger. So Control T, we can move it a little bigger, and so that's more in the foreground, and batteries galore here. It's the battery tower. And maybe one's in the very background, so Control T and we shrink it up a lot, and he's kind of over here, so you get your three-dimensional feel to this, and then you could take a picture of somebody climbing on something, and they could be climbing right here on this photo, like they're climbing up from one battery to the other. They could be jumping across something, like they're jumping from this battery to the other. You can tell a story by taking different elements from different photos and masking them and putting them into another photo. One of my favorite techniques of composites is to take a main background photo or a main photo and then add elements from other things. And what you do is you take the shots with the perspective in mind of your main shot. So saying you got some really hot looking car, maybe like a Porsche, and you want to put yourself in the driver's seat of that Porsche. Take the picture of the Porsche, whatever way you want to take the picture. Then you get yourself in front of the camera and line yourself up so that your hands are touching the wheels or the wheel, and you're behind the thing and you're doing some kind of pose. Then you can Photoshop the whole effect so it looks like you're really in the Porsche. How detectable is it? Sometimes some digital artists can make it look extremely real. Other people, not so much. Sometimes I succeed, sometimes I don't. So it's all a hit or miss game sometimes. And you don't have to leave these up and down. You can transform these any way you want. So maybe this battery, we don't like it this way. We're going to rotate it. Maybe it's falling off here. Maybe shrink it up and be like, it's a little baby battery and he's going to fall right off here. And then maybe we got another one. And he's down here, and Control T. And maybe this is like a cascade photo, and one more, and now we're down here as he falls off the screen. So as you can see, Mr. Little Battery here, baby batteries, jumping off of the big batteries and falling into oblivion because I don't have nothing down here. Now if I wanted to put something down here, I could put a nice scene of a lake or whatever down this way. And that's kind of the whole thing of composites, is that you can sit down and you can build a piece or a piece of art, from digital elements. You know, a lot of people don't think photography is necessarily art, you know, because I draw or I paint, I whatever. I personally think photography is definitely a digital art. It's a technical art. You have to know what you're doing technically in order to get something out of the camera. But it's more fun to think of it as a technical art in this sense, where you can use multiple. Like back in the day, they used to do this with slides. They would mash slides together from front to back and then shine light through it to get shots like this, where they were composites of multiple images on top of each other and then developed onto paper. So it's very possible to get some really interesting results, very possible to tell a story. You know, go look through your photos from before. You might find something that you would really like to tell a story about. So we'll call this one done too. File, save as, a JPEG. JPEG. Save. Okay, yes, I want to replace it. And now what we'll do is we'll go back and we'll review it real quick. So here was the original, what we started with. And then here is now what I developed into some type of piece here. And all it's using is two images. It's using that first image of the battery, and it's using a background image of some clouds or a sunrise or whatever the case may be. So it gets quite interesting in this sense. Because you can then build stuff. You can build, you know, if you like I said, if you had people, you could put a person right here. Let me see if I can draw a stick figure, because God knows I can't draw or paint. You know, maybe this person is trying to climb up the battery, you know, and then maybe you got the batteries falling off and maybe somebody's riding the battery. So, you know, we got this person kind of riding the battery here, and you know, with his hair flying, you know, I mean, you are only limited by your own imagination. And this can be such a fun activity. This can be such a great thing, because not only after you do it a while, you can really get good at it very quickly. And there's so many different ways that you can work a composite. There's so many different ways that you can work Photoshop. There's so many different ways that you can shoot photos. I remember watching a video on how this person took a 3D dimensional cube that was basically generated in a 3-dimensional program. She used that as the backdrop, and then in real life made tilt boards to make her perspective, so she could put a person sitting like maybe zenfully and looking into the camera, and take that shot and then put that person into that cube like they're zenful here, and then flip him over and be, you know, kind of like, you know, a rock and roller, you know, but now changing the angle of that tilt board to match the angle of the cube at that particular area. And that's how you get composites, and that's how you get composite elements. And it just, the sky's the limit, and you can do so much with so little, and it's just amazing. So anyway, that's been this week's episode of the Digital Babble. I'm Flipper. I'm your photographer and Photoshop guy. I just want to say thank you for watching the show, everybody who does watch, all the wonderful comments on Facebook. You want to go check us out, go check us out at facebook.com. I've noticed that Jakey's been using my computer lately, writing some stuff up. So Jakey the cat, you probably won't ever get to see him because he's camera shy, but he definitely loves writing up different tips and hits on our website. So go check it out at tdbny.com. You want to send us an email with your pictures. You want me to photo edit up some of your pictures. You want me to show you what I would do for the edits. You want me to critique it, whatever. Give me your photos. Keep them small. Don't make them too big. You know, less than 1,000 pixels wide by 1,000 pixels high would be more than adequate for the show. But send those in, thedigitalbabble@gmail.com. I love questions. I'm a techie person. I love to answer questions. Give me your questions. I would love to answer them for you. And that's been episode 14 here on the Digital Babble, all about Photoshop techniques here, about composites, and we covered the AV mode on the camera. So every Wednesday night, 7 p.m., we're here on fingerlakes1.com, fingerlakes1.tv. I'm out of here for this week. I'll catch you on the flip side.
A Flipside studio production. It's the Digital Babble. Tune in every Wednesday at 7 p.m. on fingerlace1.com. Check us out on Facebook and Twitter.